All right. So, Dave Norton sounds like a Republican. What the hell does that mean?
I think that's an attack by the establishment to paint me as a conservative Republican because of my opposition to building a taxpayer-funded stadium in Providence. And I made a lot of Republican contacts during that whole fiasco, and then the fiasco that followed that, the tolls legislation. I also made some Republicans, and I made some statements that the leadership didn't agree with. So I think they're trying to paint me as a conservative Republican just because I opposed spending taxpayer money to build that new stadium in Providence.
When you say leadership, what do you mean, like the Democratic leadership?
Yep, the Democratic leadership at the State House does not want to see me elected. So they're trying everything they can, from the extreme left, calling me a leftist communist with communist ties even, to a very conservative Republican. Right. So they're testing out both messages and trying to find out what happens.
Now, like when we think about the House leadership, or the Democratic leadership anyway, we're thinking of people like
Speaker Mattiello, McNamara, DeSimone. I think Cale Keeble, I think John Edwards, and a bunch of others. So the guys that are in the key positions. Like
the inner circle there, the people who seem to be the head of the different committees.
Yeah.
Yeah, the movers and shakers.
Yeah. And, they call themselves Democrats, but I like to distinguish myself from them in saying that I'm more independent minded.
Right.
In my views, but that means I really have core democratic values, whereas these people in leadership that call themselves Democrats are actually A-rated NRA legislators.
Right.
They're supported by the NRA, and they've got A ratings, which is the highest rating, and many of them are also anti-choice legislators. So these are not part of the core democratic values that we have at the national level or even the state level.
Right.
These are more in line with Republican values.
So you think that, like, when they say that you're sound like a Republican, you think they sound more like a Republican than you do?
I think that they are actually more Republican than I am. They try not to sound Republican. They don't want anyone to know that they have A+ NRA ratings.
Right.
Or that they're anti-choice, or a couple of other issues. So it's kind of weird. So a lot of Rhode Islanders don't know that Speaker Mattiello has an A+ NRA rating, or that Senate President Piva Weed has an A NRA rating.
Right, right.
So they're not really aware that the Democrats controlling the legislature are not true Democrats.
Okay. What is the progressive case against the PawSox stadium?
The progressive case against the PawSox stadium is a waste of taxpayer money, and really I see it as an abuse of power by the state legislators, and an abuse of power in that they're willing to listen to the PawSox owners, which have probably $1 billion in wealth collectively. They're willing to listen to them and give them our taxpayer money to build a new stadium in Providence that nobody wants. So I think the progressive angle on this is that the legislators do not listen and are not accountable to the voters.
What about tolls? Do you think there's a progressive case to be made against the tolls, or at least the way that we've done the tolls in Rhode Island?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very similar to the PawSox situation in that you're borrowing a lot of money, you're spending a lot of money, and the taxpayer is going to be responsible for that. So I believe in public works projects, of course, as a progressive,
Right.
but I don't believe that the people of Rhode Island trust the state leaders to go through with this toll scheme and end up with a good result. So a lot of people, and I know the Republicans have been drumming this thing up, and
Yeah.
they're going to tax the cars, and they're going to take pictures of you, and all this crazy Orwellian stuff. But there is distrust out there from the majority of people, and I think that after 38 studios and the PawSox fiasco, we should have put it on the ballot.
Yeah.
We could have restored some trust between the people and, the state leaders. But instead, they chose to push it through, and then after they pushed it through, they put an exclamation point on their incompetence by firing people who are taking people off of key committee positions because they oppose the tolls.
Oh, like Ray Hall?
Yep,
Right, right.
exactly.
Okay. Oh, okay, so you've been accused of being a Unionbuster? Is that accurate? How accurate is that?
It's not accurate at all. So somebody made a fake account on Twitter, and they used the Twitter name RI Progressive Dems and tried to pull themselves off as speaking for progressive Democrats, and said some things about me being a Republican or sounding like a Republican, and then accusing me of being a Unionbuster, which is just totally ludicrous.
Yeah.
And it wasn't an anonymous person, it wasn't anyone in the progressive movement, because progressives know me fairly well, at least the ones that go to the meetings, the Progressive Dems meetings, and the events and, the actions and protests and stuff like that. So, no, it's totally not true, and it's not in line with my economic philosophy. So I believe in collective bargaining, and I always have. I think unions are a good way of giving people job security and having a more equitable outcome in the community. So I also see it as a good way of income distribution in our community.
Right.
So no, it's totally not true. I haven't belonged to a union in my life, but that's just by chance.
Right. Is that because you came from the military directly into your own business, or?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yep. So the military's quite like a union, I think, in many ways.
Right. Let's talk about your opponent a little bit. You're Dave Coughlin,
Yep.
and how would you characterize him on these issues? Because I've heard people, give me your characterization of him on certain issues, like guns and all the issues we've been talking about.
Well, he's posted some really radical views about guns on Facebook, such as President Obama is taking guns away from Americans and he's giving them to Mexicans and Syrians.
Okay.
So he has pretty radical views, and I think they're really to the right, way to the right of me, the extreme right. And what else? In that same post on Facebook where he was accusing Obama of taking Americans' guns and giving them to Mexicans and Syrians, there was this undertone of racism that really kind of surprised me. That goes together with the gun stuff.
Right.
So I think he is really far to the right on guns. And then unions, I did the opposition research, and I found that he's actually pretty anti-union in the way that he made statements against the Pawtucket Teachers Union. Because I have to say that I don't think that David Coughlin is my true opponent. I think my true opponent for District 60 seat is House leadership.
Right.
But David Coughlin is still there existing, and he's really this right-wing guy who posts all this kind of stuff on Facebook. He posted, for example, that it was an image about Benghazi at a funeral, and there's President Obama and Hillary Clinton over a soldier's coffin, and the image stated something like they should both be charged. President Obama and Hillary Clinton should be charged with murder.
Right.
And at the same time I found that image, I saw him in the newspaper, the Providence Journal, saying that he was a true Democrat and a loyal Democrat, and that he was going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
So he's going to vote for someone he thinks should be indicted for murder?
Exactly.
That's interesting. He also, in that same Pro Joe article, identified himself as a conservative Democrat and said that there's a big tent for Democrats, and therefore he feels that he can be at home there. But what do you think of that statement? I'm a conservative Democrat.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
Mm-hmm.
He is actually a right-wing Republican, in my view, and if he wants to be a Republican and take Republican positions, then he should just come out as a Republican.
Right.
And be who he is.
Do you think it's dangerous, like taking on like issues like guns and abortion and other issues on a local race in Pawtucket? Is that something that you think, is that a difficult position to be in for you, do you think?
Yes, it's a very difficult position because there are a lot of older voters, there are a lot of seniors in Pawtucket. It's a working class neighborhood, working class district. So talking about these issues, they're really hot button issues,
yeah.
And they could get you in trouble, but they're at the same time very important issues. They need to be talked about, and we need some leadership going in a different direction. So, for example, there have been multiple shootings in Pawtucket in the past few weeks. Luckily, no one has died, but a lot of people have been injured, and a lot of people have been scared.
Right.
So we've got to talk about this issue. We've got to talk about gun control, and we've got to talk about reproductive rights, mm-hmm. of course. And it's fine if my opponent wants to be anti-choice. I'm pro-choice. I believe the decision is a woman's decision, and I support Planned Parenthood totally. Mm-hmm. I'm committed to supporting Planned Parenthood. So I really think it is difficult for me to lead people in this direction, but I think it's necessary. Right. Because I don't see any leadership coming from my opponent at all on any of the issues.
Did it ever occur to you to hide your views on these controversial issues?
No, I can't really stop myself. So my style is when an issue comes up, I just start to tackle it, especially if it's an important issue. So the gun control issue, as you know, 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are finding guns in the United States and shooting themselves on a weekly basis. You know, toddlers are shooting themselves or others on a weekly basis. So this is an issue that is very important, but if you talk about it every single day, it really turns people off and it numbs people to that. So when there are shootings in Pawtucket, it's local, it's important, it's an opportunity to grab an issue and say, look, I've got all this experience in the gun control issue. I know how many toddlers are finding guns and killing themselves. I know how many concealed carry permit holders have murdered other people in Rhode Island in cold blood. Right. I know this, and I want to share this with you, and I hope that you will support legislation to keep guns out of schools, legislation to keep guns away from domestic abusers, and limit firearms capacity. And those are 3 bills that I really believe in, and I think this is the second year that we had those 3 bills in there. Right. But unless there's this ignition of the issue, then it's very difficult to get any traction on it. So the gun issue, I feel like I have traction on now. I'm out there, I'm distinguishing myself from my opponent and from House leadership. I view this problem from a very different perspective because I've lived abroad for so many years. I lived in Denmark and Germany and Japan and for a short time in Chile.
Right.
And I've heard the views of other people, and I've lived in virtually gun violence-free areas like Japan. So my view on it is that guns are deadly weapons. I was in the Army for 3 years, active duty. I fired guns, I'm familiar with guns. They're deadly weapons. They have to be regulated. Firstly, we should start with the easy things that everyone can agree on. Background checks for everyone, 92% of Americans agree to that.
Yeah.
Keeping guns out of schools. I can't remember what the poll numbers were on that in Rhode Island, but the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence did a poll,
Right.
and a vast majority of people want to keep guns out of schools, of course. Keep them away from domestic abusers. The vast majority of Rhode Islanders want that
That was
also.
like in the mid-90s.
Yep,
Yeah.
and then limiting magazine capacity. So those 3 bills that were in the legislature, I support very much, and I think that's a good beginning to what we're doing. And I think the people on the right always say, well, criminals are always going to get guns. But that is not correct. You can prevent criminals from getting guns, or you can make it more difficult for criminals to get guns. Right now in my community, anybody can get a gun.
Yeah.
Kids are getting guns, they're going to the park, and they're shooting them. And why they're shooting them, I don't know. But they've got the easiest access to guns in the world, and this is a big problem in my community.
When you announced your candidacy, you kind of came out strong against leadership. You like you said earlier, you didn't really you consider Coughlin like your opponent, but they're almost like your opponent in name only, right? He's just this guy there,
Yeah.
and you're running against leadership. Were you to be elected, what do you think you'd be able to do with leadership once you're in?
Well, I think a lot of my work is going to be before the election, in pressuring other legislators or candidates into not voting leadership's way, and showing them that they can speak up and have a voice, and maybe join another group, have another coalition, join another caucus, talk about different things. We had every single legislator vote for Speaker Mattiello, including the Republicans, in the last election
Right.
for the Speaker in 2014.
Yep.
And he's going to come up for re-election in 2017. So I want legislators to feel the heat on who they're voting for. If you're going to vote for an A+ NRA rated legislator that is preventing us from keeping guns out of our elementary schools, then I've got a problem with you, and I'm going to call you out on it. And I'm not afraid to call you out
Right.
on it. So I think this is the direction I'd like to take, and maybe the influence that I can have at the State House. That being said, I've heard that I'm not going to get a good parking spot, and everybody's going to hate me, and I'm not going to get any legislation passed, and I'm not going to get any grants and all that other stuff, but I wouldn't believe the hype.
Yeah.
The way it sits now. Speaker Mattiello has an opponent. John Simone,
He's funny. Yeah.
has an opponent.
Yeah.
So I think they're scared. And I think they're scared of the progressives. And if we get enough progressives elected, I think we can make a huge difference. And I'd like to see Speaker Mattiello and the leadership really move to the center, not so much to the left. We just have to start with simple things like this A+ NRA rating. We need to lower that to a C or a D so that we can have simple legislation passed that protects our children while they're at school, protects them from gun violence. And I think if I can highlight this at the State House and let voters know that this is happening, then they can ask their legislators to act on that information.